Hi, this is Valeriy Solo, your local realtor and friend. And today I'm sitting here with my buddy TJ Thorne of Howdy Home Inspections. And we're going to have a conversation about everything related with home inspections whenever you're purchasing real estate. So, to start off, TJ, thank you for making time to
Yeah,
come out
man.
here. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, buddy.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
So before we started all of this, we were kind of talking about, one of my favorite places, which is the Pacific Northwest, Washington State to be specific. And you mentioned you were a mountain guide on Mount Rainier. That's awesome, man. How did you leave that and get to crawling into crawl spaces?
I don't know.
I'm curious about the path there.
That's a stroke of bad luck, I guess. I went to college in Alaska, and
Man, your story keeps getting better.
Yep. And just loved mountains, loved climbing mountains, and then got a job working on Mount Rainier and in the Pacific Northwest.
How'd you end up in Alaska? Are you from that area?
I went up there one summer to climb a mountain. And my parents kept telling me I needed to go to college, so figured that was as good a place as any.
That's smart.
Yeah.
That's smart.
So that's it. Ended up in Washington State, and then was living in Portland.
Yeah.
And eventually made her way back here. My wife, she got pregnant, and figured Charlotte was a good place to raise a kid. I grew up here.
Oh, okay. So, I was going to ask, how'd you guys land in Charlotte?
So we got out of Portland and out of the Pacific Northwest and headed back home, and been here ever since.
So how long would you say were you on the West Coast side for?
So I graduated high school in '94, and then from '94 to basically 2001, I was Alaska, Washington, Oregon.
So about 6-7 years.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So when we moved here from Washington State in 2004, the one thing I missed the most was like the mountains. We got Sugar Mountain, Asheville, 5-hour drive up north. You got Snowshoe, but that doesn't compare to
those mountains are rad. So the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountain range on Earth, or one of them.
Oh, wow.
They're way older than the Cascades or anything that you'll find in Alaska. So, like, when you think about the natural history of the mountains that we have here, I don't know, it's a really rich history, so it kind of gives you a new appreciation for what we have here.
I've acquiesced. It took me about 10 years, but I finally accepted Charlotte as my home.
Yeah.
And the Appalachian Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains, they're gorgeous in their own way.
They are.
Their own kind of beauty.
But those mountains out there are just awesome.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that little tidbit.
Yeah,
I was
man.
just curious. But yeah, I guess just curious, once you moved back here, can you tell me a little bit about how you got into inspections and how Howdy Home Inspection came about? Because, we're talking Pacific Northwest, talking Carolinas, and now you're bringing Howdy, which is like more Texas, or I don't know.
Yeah. So my dad was a builder, a big time builder here in town. He built custom houses over here in Piper Glen, and Moorcroft over there by South Park.
Okay. So you grew up in that.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Park, and I grew up kind of going around to the different job sites with him.
Okay.
And I went to college and figured I needed to get a job.
Yeah.
Mountain climbing business wasn't going to really pay the bills. So my dad always said that, the building and the development business is a really good business when it's a good business. And then when it's not, it's really not.
Yeah,
and that's when everybody goes belly up.
Yeah.
So the home inspection business is a really good business because you can get into it with pretty low overhead and pretty low startup cost, and there isn't a lot of exposure financially if you go slow. If I take out $1 million to build a spec home and that spec home doesn't sell, well, now me and my family are living under a bridge. There's a lot of risk there. Home inspection business, you need a ladder, you need a bunch of tools, or not even a bunch. You need some tools. And you need some knowledge, and that's it. There's not a lot of risk, which is kind of
Well, and with your construction background growing up, so you already had the innate experience, knowledge to know what to look for.
Yeah.
So it kind of just fell in line to what you already had natural experience.
Yep, perfect. So it's great if you have like ADD or it's perfect, because when you build a house, you're building a house for 6 or 8 months or whatever it takes. But a home inspection, you're in and out in 3 or 4 hours or whatever it takes, and you're kind of on to your next one. And it's so exciting for people buying a house.
Yeah.
You kind of get to have. Everybody's just excited and really happy that
Until
you're
they
doing
get your
it for
inspection
them.
report, right?
Well, they're happy
I'm
to
just
get they're
kidding.
happy to get that
I'm just
too
kidding.
because we can save them a lot of money and we
Yeah.
can really
Yeah.
tell them about things that man they would have never known if they would have never hired an inspector.
And I definitely want to get into that here in a little bit about like inspection reports, what to look out for and whatnot. But I can definitely I understand what you're talking about as far as having clients that are excited about buying a house. And for me, and I think maybe what you're kind of alluding to is I feel like it's a privilege to be a part of that. The people's excitement, it's a huge life decision. It's a major thing. And to be privy to that, be a part of that transaction, and to help people with that, like, yeah, there's monetary reward, but there's also fulfillment from that side.
Big,
of it.
yeah,
So
big time.
I
mean,
do love
it's,
that.
Yeah, you're kind of on the right side of the.
Yeah.
It's not like owning a funeral home or something where it's just always folks are sad.
Yeah.
This is like everybody's pumped, and so you kind of get to be a part of it, and it just makes life a lot better.
That's awesome, and it's good that you also can appreciate that. It shows that you actually care about the clients that you service.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So when did you officially open up Howdy Home Inspections?
So I started doing this in 2001 in Florida.
Okay.
But when we moved back to North Carolina, I think I started this 2000, maybe 2010, maybe 2012.
Okay.
And
This is when things slowly started to pick back up after
Yep,
the Great Recession.
So it was probably 2012 because, and when I started off pretty. Well, I wouldn't say like gangbusters, but I started off pretty, had a lot of business kind of right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And so I got lucky, and I was having a great time doing it, and that's kind of how it happened.
You've been doing it ever
I'll
since?
just keep on going, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So do you have a certain amount of inspectors that you work with that work under you, or is it mostly just you? What does your outfit look like?
Yeah, so I have some different inspectors that work with me.
Okay.
Everybody's been with me for, I think the newest guy is probably 7 or 8 years.
Oh, wow.
He's been with me.
The newest
So we all do 2 a day.
Okay.
About 500 each a year, maybe a little bit less.
Wow.
And
wow, that's a lot of
yeah.
inspections.
So we stay pretty busy. And so we like with my particular company, it's not like somebody is an insurance agent during the day and they're picking up jobs on the weekend.
Yeah.
All of my guys, and myself included, we do inspections full time.
That's awesome.
And which you kind of need because, it helps you get the experience, helps keep you fresh and keep you on your toes and that sort of thing. Just to be able to provide like a really good detailed inspection. You kind of have to be doing it a lot to
It doesn't
be
seem
good
like
at
this
it.
is like a part-time kind of thing that you
Yeah. I mean, it'd be a sweet part-time gig. It's just hard to, like if I was a cobbler and I was making shoes, if I only made 3 pair of shoes a year, I probably wouldn't be as good as the cobbler making 100.
Yeah, this is what you do full time, and your head's in that space, and you're always it's different versus
same thing with you. Like you being a full-time agent,
Yeah.
you have way more experience than these other agents that are just kind of doing it on the side.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Well, let me turn to some of these questions that we have prepared, and we'll just go off of it. So I guess one of the first things that I wanted to discuss is, what are some of the biggest things to look out for when doing an inspection? I know there's moisture issues, structural issues, roofing issues. Aside from that, what are the other big ticket items that buyers need to look out for normally?
So during our inspections, we're checking all the major components of the home.
Okay.
So we're checking the heating and air, we're checking the plumbing, the electrical, the roofing, the structural, insulation, ventilation, doors, windows, siding. So now part of that, so like for example, if there's a loose doorknob on a bedroom closet, we're going to find it, we're going to tell you about it. But that wouldn't be nearly as big of an issue as say, you have a girder, like a beam in your crawl space that supports all the floor joists that's been eaten up by termites or damaged by a bunch of moisture. So replacing that girder from a financial point of view is going to be much more expensive and much more important to a buyer than a loose doorknob on a closet.
Yeah.
So kind of the way that we do our inspections is we just tell you everything.
Okay.
Big stuff, little stuff, and but we also are able to advise our customers as to what the more important stuff is. Like I'll say, man, worry about this girder, don't worry about the doorknob. But with that being said, it drives my wife nuts because every time I do an inspection on my own house, I just kind of pick the things that are the most important to me. And they're pretty much all the time. They're not the things that are important to her.
It's like that little stuff, we'll get to it.
Yeah, so every time we move into a house, she's like, the bedroom door doesn't shut, it sticks. And I was like, oh yeah, I know about that. And she's like,
on an inspection report, that would not be a major issue.
You should have gotten this fixed. So, so but to answer your question, I think the big stuff is just kind of the big ticket items. How old is your heating and air system? How old is your roof? How old's the water heater? A heating and air system is expensive. And so if it's 20 years old and it's just barely keeping up when it's 90 degrees outside, that to me, that's a pretty important thing if the buyer doesn't have the ability to absorb that cost when it dies. So I think those big ticket items are sort of the most important thing.
And speaking specifically to HVAC, I've heard different things, but I think in general I hear that HVAC unit typically is rated for 10 to 12 years, maybe 15. Anything past that is bonus time. What's your take on that? What is your, and obviously there's exceptions. I've seen systems 20, 25 plus that's still running. What's your expectation of an HVAC system if you're going in to inspect a house? What do you see as far as lifespans on average?
I think for an AC system, maybe 12 to 15 years is probably typical. We see them all the time where they're over 20, they're still working really good. There's no leaks in the coal or anything like that.
And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like the 80-year-old that's running marathons. I mean, he's running them marathons, but he's also 80, right? Like, how long will that last? So we don't know.
So you want to be kind of prepped mentally that it might go, but if it's still working, there's not really a necessary.
So just kind of let those things ride. I think my biggest thing that I try to tell folks is, if you're getting into summer and your AC unit's 18 years old, but it's working well, kind of have the company already picked out. Have the prices shot, have the folks that you feel comfortable with, because the last thing that you want to do is for it to be 100 degrees outside, that AC die, and then you call some guy and he's like, I'm putting it in tomorrow, it's going to cost $20,000.
Yeah, you'll pay the emergency price.
Yeah, you don't want to pay the emergency price, but if you have in mind who you're going to use, and you're a fantastic resource for referrals like that, I imagine. I think that would be a really big thing. But with the ACs, kind of let those things ride. So the AC, let's say they're maybe 12 to 15 years is what they last. The furnaces tend to last quite a bit longer. Or maybe not quite a bit, but they tend to last a lot longer.
AC systems.
Because the furnace, like the way that an AC works is you have that refrigerant running through those coals, and so they tend to rust. Right? And then when they rust and that refrigerant leaks out, then the AC doesn't work as well. But the furnace isn't working with that refrigerant. It's working with flames. If it's a gas furnace. And so they just tend to do a lot better in terms of longevity than an AC system would. And it's not uncommon to see furnaces last 20 years all the time.
Awesome. That's good to know. I know you're not an HVAC guy. What's your preference? Electric, like heat pump, or gas?
Well, I think most people would say that's sort of like, would you rather have a Ferrari or a Lambo? Like they're right. I mean, they're both really good. I don't think you'll go wrong either way. But I think maybe. I think my preference would be like an electric AC with a gas furnace. You sort of split them up, and that gas furnace has a really good the flames that
more efficient.
Yes, way more efficient. It heats up faster, blows out hotter air. The electric heat is really good. It's just it doesn't fire up as fast and heat as fast as a furnace would.
Got it. That's good to know. Aside from HVAC, structural, that's the other big things. I mean, probably even maybe a more bigger thing if it's serious structural issues.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess, can you speak to what are some examples that you found that were maybe not apparent right away, but you were able to discover after doing an inspection? Like, have you ever run into any serious major structural issues like that in any of your inspections?
Yeah, yeah. So especially houses that are on crawl spaces, you know, the biggest problem with like in construction is, you know, a house is sort of like, you have to think about it holistically. Like all these, for example, you go into a crawl space, right? It has a floor joist that runs down, you know, through the crawl space, attaches to the girder sitting on the foundation wall on the other side. Well, when you're building that house, the plumber comes in and he says, I got to get my toilet right here. And this piece of wood is in my way.
Cut it off.
What does the plumber do? He's not a structural guy. He's not a framer. He cuts that floor joist and to put his plumbing pipe. Well, now you don't have a floor joist in the floor, right? The plumber doesn't know. He's not a carpenter. So you find a lot of that stuff where the framers frame things up, and then plumbers or electricians come in and kind of goof it up after the fact. And now we have like engineered lumber. So instead of like a piece of, you know, whatever, 2x8 floor joists of dimensional lumber, they come in and they add these I-joists, right? These engineered joists. Well, they have their own set of rules. Like you're not allowed to drill through the flanges and you're not allowed to mess around with those. Well, the plumber that didn't know anything, the plumber that cut the regular floor joists, he's sure not going to know that you can't go messing around with an engineered piece of wood. So you find a lot of stuff like one trade kind of messing up what the other trade had done.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And so typically these kind of items, they're found like in the crawl space or the attics, not somewhere that a homeowner normally would go crawl around in.
Yeah, a homeowner wouldn't find a lot of that. Like up in the attic with those trusses, they break all the time during delivery or during installation. Sometimes they don't put them in plumb and they're sort of cocked off to the side.
Yeah.
And you really, when you start getting into engineered stuff like that, you really need to make sure that it stays intact and
make sure it's not
installed
compromised,
correctly.
the integrity of it. Okay, that's good to know. Oh, and one other major item that I think Charlotte might deal with more than others is our subtropical climate. We have humidity. What kind of issues do you find that homes have because of the heightened humidity in the summer times especially?
Yep, so one of the big things that we do down here is we put heating and air systems in crawl spaces. And so the result of that is you have, in the middle of the summer, you've got 90-degree crawl space and you have 40-degree air blowing through an air duct in the crawl space. And that's going to naturally create a lot of condensation. Now those ducts that it's running through, they're insulated. But they're not real insulated. It's kind of like putting a koozie on a can of lemonade or something.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, the koozie still gets wet, so it reduces the condensation,
but it doesn't stop it.
But it's kind of absorbing it, and it's still wet. And so you see a lot of like elevated moisture levels in our crawl spaces down here in the south, and which isn't in itself a big deal. But when the wood underneath the house starts getting saturated, then it can create like microbial growth and fungal growth. And some types of fungus eat wood. Like they actually have wood destroying fungus.
That's crazy.
And then when you have higher moisture levels, then you have a whole nother set of exposures to like wood destroying insects. So it's important, you know, we're sort of fighting an uphill battle because we're in a really hot place with a lot of humidity. We got our ACs jammed in our crawl spaces, which creates more moisture and more humidity. So it's really important to try to keep those moisture levels down, to create ventilation, to keep things like a cross breeze going through. And just anything that we even find a lot of like dehumidifiers in crawl spaces that that help bring that moisture level down. Because if you keep the moisture level down, it protects the wood, it prevents mold and fungus, it helps reduce the possibility of, attracting termites.
Yeah.
And so that's, it's an uphill battle, but I think if people are diligent about it, it's one that you're able to win.
So as far as moisture levels in the crawl space, I think if I recall correctly, 14, 16% is kind of like the maximum comfortable amount. When you get to the 18, 20%, that's kind of like yellow zone, and 20% and above. And we're talking about wood saturation, not a different kind of moisture or humidity levels. So I think I heard like 20% and above, if left untreated for a while, that's when you start getting all those issues with the wood rot, the wood-eating bacteria, the wood-destroying insects being attracted and all that. Is that what you find?
Yeah.
Or
So 20% is sort of that threshold for microbial growth.
Okay.
So if you ever, I think the neatest way to think about it is, have you ever in your shower, like you have a tub and then you have that shower surround, and then you see that pink kind of, that pink stuff sort of on the top of the shower at the base of the surround? If you've ever noticed that stuff, as you're showering every day, it'll get real pink. And then you go away on vacation and you come back and now it's like a light pink, or it's sort of gone. So what happens is when you take away the moisture from the wood or from that shower, that fungus and that mold needs moisture to kind of grow and to propagate. You take away the moisture and it just can't grow. So 20% is sort of that threshold. Keep your moisture levels below 20%, you're golden. Once they get above it, then that stuff can sort of start to grow and become an issue.
And you mentioned having the potentially dehumidifier, the cross breeze from open crawl space vents. One other thing that I find that helps tremendously, and for me and my clients, whenever we look at homes, when we look in a crawl space, that's one of the main things I check, is if they have a vapor barrier.
Oh yeah, dude, that's
we have soils
huge.
that emit, evaporation, and if it's into a crawl space that's not covered with a vapor barrier, all that's going into the insulation, into the wood members, into the crawl space itself. So
that's more important than anything I mentioned.
And vapor barrier is like not that expensive, right?
Yeah,
just a big plastic sheet that needs to be laid down.
For sure.
And I guess one more question about crawl space, so we can move on to other things. As far as the vapor barrier, do you see a big difference between, the properly sized like 6 mil vapor barrier just being placed down and maybe like a foot up, versus a complete encapsulation? Or does just a regular vapor barrier do the job most of the time?
Well, those encapsulations are, now this is just personal preference.
Yeah,
but I've been in those
encapsulated
encapsulated crawl spaces, and they're like sweet. I mean, you can eat spaghetti off the floor.
I was gonna say,
they're really nice.
They look clean.
Yeah, I hate going in them because all I want to do is take a nap. I mean, they're really nice, right?
Yeah.
But I've also been in some where the dehumidifier goes out and there is no ventilation down there.
Ooh, that's not
and
good.
that is terrible. So my experience with those, when they're great, they're great. And when they're not, they're really not.
Okay.
So we've been building houses with crawl space vents and cross ventilation for
So that and a
300
vapor barrier,
years.
for the most part, will be sufficient.
I personally like the old school way, just having a really nice vapor barrier, having those crawl space vents to ventilate it, and dealing with the moisture that way. Like I said, those encapsulations are really nice, but they do require some maintenance and attention to make sure that they're functioning the way they're supposed to be functioning.
Yeah, that's one thing I heard about, like the green revolution and houses getting a lot more efficient, and I guess all the different ways that a house breathes. As they're closed up, you open up potentially new issues where moisture that typically would just ventilate out, it gets trapped and causes further issues. So
oh yeah, and people don't realize it, but like in an attic, you have those attics. If they don't have ventilation, they can create a ton of mold and fungal growth in there. So you have air that comes up through the soffit vents, right?
Yeah.
And then hot air rises, so it's able to escape out of the ridge vent. That little that little
Plastic cap
elevated
on top.
cap on the top of your roof or along the ridge.
Yeah.
And so it kind of creates this
Natural circulation.
Yeah, natural circulation. Well, if you were to seal those up, you'd have huge issues. So that's part of what a home inspection is doing. Also, with the attic, is looking at that insulation and ventilation up in the attic and the crawl space to make sure that it's good, so you don't have those secondary those issues from it.
So to that point, you know, we can move up into the attic spaces. A lot of these homes here in the Carolinas, they're older, and some of them, they don't have the, I guess, modern soffit and fascia vents that are installed, you know, whether it's plastic, metal, or wood with the holes. Some of them are solid wood, but they have gables on each side of the house, like if it's a single brick ranch home.
Yeah, yeah.
From your experience, is that usually sufficient to help that natural circulation we're talking about, or do you recommend getting extra vents cut out into like the wood soffits and fascias?
So I always like the soffit vents.
Okay.
But I've been in plenty of houses where all they have are gable vents, and they seem to do decent. I mean, in theory, hot air rises, so you should have cold, you know, fresh air coming in from the bottom and pushing the hot air out of the top.
Okay.
If you just have the gable vents, it's pretty easy to add a ridge vent.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's super easy. I think it would be always beneficial to do that.
So regardless, ridge vent definitely.
Yeah, ridge vents are great. And then they also have fans that you can put in the attic.
That was going to be my next question. What's your thoughts on attic fans?
Yeah, those are great.
So temperature controlled, they kick on,
you can
right?
set those things for like, you know, 95 degrees and then, or whatever you set it for. And then once it gets to that temperature, it'll recognize it, it'll click on, and it just sucks all that hot air out of the attic. And you know, not just from like a mold and fungus point, but the cooler you can keep your attic, the longer it makes your shingles last, right?
Oh,
really hot attics,
it bakes the
really,
shingles.
it just beats your shingles real bad and can decrease the life of that roof.
And it gets nasty in the summertime too in the attic.
Man,
back in my construction days, I was like, man, you just go in there and immediately you're sweating like crazy, and definitely make sure to stay hydrated.
Yeah, no doubt.
But that's interesting about the shingles. I know also if you can keep your attic, you know, well-maintained temperatures, you know, with the natural circulation, with the fan, that'll also help the HVAC system not work as hard. Your heating and cooling bills will go down. So there's many benefits to it.
Oh, yeah.
I need to get that attic fan installed that I bought 3 years ago. And put on the list. Many things that are on the list. Okay, that's good to know. Let's see, next questions. So what are, I guess, some of the biggest red flags that you think homeowners should look out for when looking at homes, prospective homes?
Well, I think all those big ticket items. So like, how old is the heating and air system? How old's that water heater? What's that crawl space look like? Do you open up that door and see that vapor barrier that you're talking about? That vapor barrier is like a huge deal. I mean, the difference between having one and not having one is a monster difference.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that's like something basic you can do that'll cause a lot of potential issues to go away. So.
Yeah, so I think I would look at that, those things. And if you can look at the little data tags on like a heating and air unit and sort of get an idea how old it is. Some of those data tags will actually tell you the manufacturing date. And so that would be a big thing. Also look for any sort of cracking, like if it's a brick house. That would be, you know, that would be important to look at those. And then also the age of the house that you're buying. Certain periods of houses have certain issues. Like older houses might have knob and tube wiring. And then houses built between like 1964 and 1973 had something called small branch aluminum wiring. And that's, but now...
You gotta get those purple lug nuts, right?
There you go. But now we have copper wiring for like 15 and 20 amp breakers, right? Just single strand copper wires. So when you're looking at a house and it's built between 64 and 73, you know, that's something that you kind of have to keep in mind. If you have it, you know, maybe that might be an extra costs that
Yeah.
you need to absorb to get that kind of updated.
Yeah, and just to speak to this specific point, from what I understand, the old aluminum wiring and the new copper wiring, if they're connected together to finish a circuit, if you're doing some kind of renovation or remodeling and you're not changing out all the old wiring, you're just combining old and new, there's a corrosive reaction that happens with those two different metals, and you have to get these special,
Yep.
what are they called? The little things that you screw onto
You mean
wire.
like a nut?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
wire nuts, the purple ones, they have some kind of gray goo in there that helps slow down this corrosion or something
Yeah.
like that. So interesting stuff that you pick up along the way. And as far as the red flags, you mentioned cracks. One thing I wanted to see if you could clarify, some cracks, structural, and you can see, okay, this is a big issue. Sometimes I see some cracks that it's just the veneer of the brick or
Sure.
it's superficial. How can you differentiate between the two? Is there an easy way, or do you have to really get in there and inspect everything to be able to
Well,
tell?
you kind of need to look at, so when you build a house, even like a 1960s house is a wood house, right? And then they put up a veneer on the outside. Sometimes that's brick, sometimes it's vinyl siding, you know, maybe it's wood, whatever it is. So that brick, a lot of times that happens is a brick veneer. It's just on the outside,
So
like,
it's just like
what you're saying.
it's like on the face of it, like a mask almost. It doesn't do anything to hold this the house up structurally. Okay.
But sometimes that brick, well, all the time that brick is sitting on a footing, its own footer. Now you need to decide if that brick is cracked and that footing that's caused that brick to crack is also cracked. Well, does that footing go into the footing that's supporting the actual block or brick of the house, the foundation of the house? So there's that type of cracking, and they can have varying severities as well.
Now, is there a certain like pattern to cracks that are structural versus not, or they all go different?
No. So there are, and that's sort of, it's starting to get outside of the scope of what an inspector does when you're analyzing that.
Okay.
But typically, like if you have, say you have a crack above a window, right, on a brick veneer house. Well, a lot of times that brick, when it goes across the window, you have a steel lintel, which is like a little steel crossbar, right?
Yeah.
For that brick to set on.
Yeah.
And when winter and summer comes and goes, that metal is expanded and contracting.
Yeah.
And as that metal shrinks, that brick can sag, and then it expands and it's pushed back up. And so those types of cracks could just be caused by something as simple as that lintel.
Yeah.
But when you go and you see a house that has like a horizontal crack along the corner of the house, maybe an engineer comes out and says, oh, no, this isn't like a veneer thing. This is maybe differential settlement in the soul.
Okay.
And so when you get into cracks like that, I think it's important to spend the extra money for an engineer, because the difference between putting in a couple helical piers versus a lintel that's just expanding and contracting, that's
a huge difference.
That's a big difference, and that's a call that an engineer can make just by, I mean, they can probe the soil, they can do all sorts of things to help get to the bottom of that.
So typically in your inspections, you will locate and identify potential cracks that could be structural, but to investigate further, usually that's at the point the structural engineer will step in.
Yeah, especially when they start getting a little more gnarly.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. So let's see. Sorry about this, a little bit unprofessional. It's okay. I mean, it's very professional. That's how professionals do it. Next question. So extra inspections that are not typical, part of the home inspection, specifically radon and termites. Those are the common ones that I get frequently asked about. What's your take on those two inspections? Do you recommend them? Do you not? Is it just extra stuff?
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so termites, we live in the South, so with termites, it's kind of not a matter of if you're going to get them, it's going to be a matter of when.
Okay.
So I think termite inspection is about as important as a home inspection.
Yeah.
That's just needs to be done.
I agree. I always tell my clients, because I have some clients that are like in construction, or they're like, oh, I'll just look at the house myself, and I tell them, well, at a minimum, I absolutely recommend getting a termite inspection.
Oh yeah, and those termites,
they're not even that expensive.
They're sneaky. They're tricky little suckers. I mean, they'll climb up. So that girder, that thing that I was telling you about that holds up those floor joists, it might be 3 different tubitins that are sort of nailed together.
Yeah.
And those termites will just climb right up the center between those pieces of wood.
You can't see them.
And, yeah, the buyer or
sneaky
somebody
little buggers.
yeah, it would never be able to see it in a million years, right?
Yeah.
So and then the other thing too is the termite inspection is not just termite, but it's all wood destroying insects. Okay. So it'll be powder post beetles, old house borers, carpenter bees, carpenter ants. So we're not doing that. We're kind of subcontracting that out.
Okay.
If the buyer
But that is
wants
something
us
that
to.
you highly recommend.
Yeah, but I always suggest that people get that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because and I don't know how this happened. It's almost a little embarrassing, but every single client, I'm always looking out, like inspections. My wife and I bought a house as a rental property in Mint Hill. And, I have a construction background, so I went through and looked at everything. I'm like, okay, I'm going to rehab all of it. Bought the house. And then once I started renovating, I removed the sheetrock, and I saw signs of termites. And silly me, I didn't think to get a termite inspection. Turns out the entire house had an infestation of termites, powder post beetles, and carpenter ants. Yeah, and then it was like my eyes got open, because this house was on a basement. Because after, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a tube. It was right in front of my eyes. See the signs of termites.
Yeah, and you'll see them on the sheetrock. I mean, I've seen them on the ceiling
they
or
cut out
on
little
walls
grooves in the wood. I got lucky, and my theory is, I think that before we ran out of old growth wood, lumber that was used to build houses, that lumber was very sturdy. Like back in my renovation days, I remember trying to reno a 1900s house. That was the hardest piece of wood to pull a nail out of. It was dense. So this house is older, and I think that wood was older. And it could be, I'm just theorizing, it could be way off, but I think maybe that wood was not soft enough for them to dig into deep, because there were signs of termites throughout the entire house, but it was all surface level stuff. So I got lucky in that there was no compromising of the structure, and I did get it treated.
Yeah.
But I feel like if it was the new growth wood, they probably would have ate it all up. Because that house was vacant for 10 years, and they would.
Yeah, I don't think they grow wood like they used to.
No,
I think it's like those chickens that they jack up on steroids, and the chickens get too big for their little legs.
Well, apparently, good trees take 20 years to grow, but the first 5 years is when they grow the fastest. So once it's big, they chop it, and it's you can see lumber these days warps quicker. It's not as quality.
I mean, I could go out here and hit a phone pole with my scooter going 20 miles an hour, probably. Knock that telephone pole over it. So that's not the way it used to be.
Yeah. But anyways, it was just funny to me that I'm like, man, I'm always worried about my clients. I didn't even think about myself for this. But I got lucky, because sometimes some termites, like you said, they'll get into the middle of the girder and you don't see the damage, but then you put a screwdriver through it and it just goes all the way through. That's not good. Then you got a huge multiple thousands of dollars repair potentially. So termite inspection.
Yeah, I think that for termite inspection, for the cost of it, I think that's kind of a no-brainer. So I'm the way I run my business is I'm not a pushy guy. I'm not trying to talk people into stuff, and so I just sort of do what people want me to do.
What they're comfortable with.
But man, it makes my skin crawl when somebody doesn't want a termite inspection, because they're so important.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, termites aren't necessarily end of the world. I've had clients that have had termite infestations happen on newer houses. I've seen older houses. They're treatable. Oftentimes when they're found, it's all localized in a small area. A couple $100, $500-600. Most of the times that I've dealt with is the repair cost. So it's not always oh no, we have termites, the end of the world. But it is something that you do need to inspect for. be diligent about and do preventative maintenance to
Yeah,
you know
for
like
sure.
keep your crawl space not humid.
And everybody's going to get them at
Yeah.
some point. Everybody's going to get them.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of treat for them and you're good to go for
Yeah.
another 6-7 years.
Exactly. Radon inspections. What's your take on those? From my perspective or my experience, I think it depends on, first of all, the location. Some areas we know are more prone to radon. Some areas are not. But also it depends on the person. Some people, it's similar to like high voltage power lines.
Yeah.
Some people are like, no, you know, no 5G,
Yeah,
no
yeah.
high power voltage, like it's gonna affect us. And then maybe there is something to it. That's another discussion. Some people, they don't care at all.
Yeah,
So radon kind of falls into that category where it's like some clients do want it, some clients don't care at all.
Yeah.
What's your take on radon?
So my experience with
And,
radon.
sorry to interrupt. First of all, what is radon?
So radon is a carcinogenic gas that's coming up from the ground.
Okay.
It's
Trying to kill us.
It's a second decay product of uranium, which is like the most abundant radioactive material on Earth.
Wow.
So you remember from like high school chemistry class, they talk about half-life.
Yeah.
Of an element. And so uranium is an element which has a half-life. So radon is the second decay element of that.
Okay.
Now the problem with that.
So the first half-life after radon, after uranium, it becomes radon?
No, yeah. So it'll decay and then it'll decay again into radon.
Oh, that's
I think
cool.
it's rumidium, or I forget what it is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But
That's cool.
but the problem with it is that the half-life of uranium is something nuts, like
Yeah.
4.8 billion years.
Yeah.
So basically, if you have a house that is built in an area that has a lot of uranium underneath it, which is found in rocks,
Yeah.
right? So if your house is built on a lot that has a lot of rocks, then it's going to be releasing radon kind of forever, more or less.
Yeah.
And now if you have it, it's a really big deal.
Yeah.
It's the leading cause of lung cancer outside of smoking.
Wow.
So, but you have to realize that radon is coming up from the ground.
Yeah.
Right? So if you live in a tree house, your radon's going to be really low.
Yeah.
If you're living in a basement house or you're living in a bunker, then
So
it's probably going to be really
Once it
hot.
comes up from the ground, like your treehouse example, if it's in the air, does it kind of dissipate
it's
and
sorta-
get blown
it's
away?
it's sort of.
So the closer to the ground you are, like basement, that's the most important.
Yeah. So a basement, that radon's coming in from the ground in the
Yeah.
basement, but don't forget basements are also below grade, so it's also coming in from the walls. So if you have a walkout basement, you have 3 walls on the side that radon's coming in from.
Okay.
Plus you also have radon coming up from the ground. So
Okay.
the basements tend to be the highest.
Okay.
Now the lowest would be like a crawl space house, because that radon comes up into the crawl space, and then you have those crawl space vents with cross ventilation, and so a lot of it has a chance to escape.
Before it reaches to the main floor.
Now we find it on crawl space houses, but my experience is it tends to be a lot less frequent than a
basement.
slab or a
Okay.
basement house.
So what is, how do you test for it and decide it's too high, and what is the treatment for radon?
Yeah,
If it is
so there are different ways to test for it, but we have like a continuous monitoring machine.
Okay.
And so the EPA sort of sets all these rules, right?
And we know we can trust them. That's an aside.
So they set these rules, right? And so they say for a real estate transaction, we're allowed to take 48 different readings, 1 hour apart,
Okay.
right? A 48-hour test. So we'll set this little machine up, and they have all these rules on where it needs to be set up.
Yeah.
Like it's got to be on an interior wall. It has to be a certain amount of inches off the ground. It can't be, within, say, 10 feet of like an air return. So they have all these rules on where they want you to
so
test
the
for.
results won't get affected.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then we'll set these machines up, and it'll pop on just like for a split second. 48 different times over the course of 2 days. It'll take a reading, and then it averages all these readings together to come up with an average radon level. And then we compare that to what the EPA has set as sort of their threshold. Anything under it doesn't need to be mitigated. Anything over it does need to be mitigated.
And what is the threshold?
What's measured in picocuries per liter, and their threshold is 4.0 picocuries
So
per liter.
if it's under 4.0 picocuries per meter?
Per liter.
Per liter.
Yeah, then it doesn't need to be mitigated, and anything over that would need to be mitigated. Now,
and what does mitigation look like?
so it depends on what kind of house you have. If you have a concrete slab or a basement, they'll do something called subslab depressurization. They'll basically drill a hole, right, and then they'll dig out a pit. And they'll do some tests to make sure that underneath that slab there's communication, that there's airflow underneath it, right? So they'll do some tests.
Is there airflow under slabs?
Oh yeah. So what they'll do is they'll drill a hole, and then they'll go to the other side of the slab. They'll drill another hole. They'll hook a shop vac up to one hole and shoot some liquid smoke down the other hole. And if that smoke is sucked down from the pressure of that shop vac on the other side of the house, then you know there's communication below the slab, that there's airflow underneath it.
Is there airflow, and this is just like that's pretty cool. I didn't know that. How does the air flow through the soils? Is there just like little pockets of air?
Yeah. Well, so that concrete, like you could have that concrete, but then there's dirt and there's gravel and all that kind of stuff.
So it's not like watertight. So so I guess similar how water could potentially get through.
Yeah, exactly.
Now
So
it makes more
so
sense.
when if there's that communication, if there's airflow underneath that slab, then they know that they can hook up that mitigation system in one location, and then they put a pipe in the ground and hook a fan up to it, and that fan just starts sucking, and anything it's sucking down in that pit, you know it's sucking from the other side of the house because it sucked that smoke, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how one system is able to suck radon from underneath that whole slab.
So that system where the fan is sucking the air, that typically will catch most of the radon that normally would go up into the house.
Yeah.
It gets sucked and
Yep.
thrown outside, or where is it?
Yep. So that pipe, it's a PVC pipe. It's a drain pipe for like a shower or toilet, right?
Yeah.
And so they'll have it come up. They'll hook a fan to it, and then they'll vent it outside of the house, and then they vent it up over the roof, like over the eave of the house. Because you don't want to say vent it underneath your bathroom window, and then all the radon you just sucked out is being shot back into your house, right?
Now, so does radon rise naturally, or is it a heavy
so
gas?
it rises, and then you remember how I said that the half-life of that uranium is really long?
Yeah.
Well, because that half-life is so long, those radon mitigation units, that fan kind of has to run continuously forever because it's constantly going to be sucking that radon.
Okay.
And a lot of people, it's really neat to think about. A lot of people don't realize it, but if you go get like a Geiger counter, from go down here to the college, pick up one of those things, and go the granite on your kitchen counters. You put that Geiger counter up to it, it'll start dinging like crazy. That granite in your kitchen releases radon too.
Oh, wow.
It's just not at a level that is going to be enough to really affect the overall limits.
Have you ever run across very radioactive granite countertops?
Oh yeah,
really? I'm saying like really high, where it's like this.
I've never seen them like, oh my god, I'm going to cancel this inspection.
Don't prep my meal on this countertop, please.
It's funny because I think the highest level I've found in Charlotte's like 17 picocuries per liter, or 18 or something like that.
More than 4 times.
Which is, more than 4 times. But I did an inspection for a woman who was moving to Ohio. I mean, it might have been Pennsylvania. I think it was Ohio, though. But she said that the house she was buying came in at 230.
What?
230. And those people had lived in that house like 30 years.
Wow.
I don't want to eat. I would eat lunch in that house at 230.
You like a little cancer with your house?
So,
wow. Okay, well, that's good to know. I definitely, because that's one thing I always wondered. I knew the mitigation. I guess it just never clicked to me how radon mitigation works exactly. For some reason, I imagined the gas dropping into the systems that are installed, but really it's more just the constant suction.
Yeah. What it's doing is it's sucking that rate. It's just sucking air out
and
of that
negative
pipe.
air pressure forces all of it into that pipe.
Into that pipe, and it vents it out. So it doesn't get the level to 0, but they guarantee, those mitigation companies guarantee to get it below 4.
Okay, and last question about radon, then we can move on. What if there is no communication under the slab? What's the mitigation?
So what they do is, a lot of these mitigation companies will do like grab samples where they take different readings in different areas of the house, and based on that they can kind of design what the system is going to look
so
like.
That's
but sometimes
more...
sometimes you need to get 2 different ones and maybe tie them together or run them in different locations.
So
Whatever
it all
they
depends on
decide.
the readings of the particular house.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, awesome. Well, that was some good stuff. All right, just a few more questions and we'll be wrapping this thing up here soon. So what is, let's see, what are some regular, preventative maintenance things that you as an inspector would recommend for home buyers to do to help them, lower the potential of costly?
So I think, a house kind of like a car.
Okay.
Right? And so everything needs to be serviced.
Okay.
So just like you get your oil changed, your house has things that need to be serviced as well. So the heating and air company, when they say, we need to service your unit once or twice a year, they need to service it once or twice a year. And with that, they're going to be checking the functionality of it as well. So like we were talking about the age of the furnace, right? When they service it, they might pull that blower and check the heat exchanger on your service to make sure they're on your furnace to make sure there's no cracks in that, which could create carbon monoxide, and that's a big problem. They'll clean out your condenser outside, and so it's more efficient. And
so
the air,
servicing the things that need to be
servicing that. One thing people don't realize is your roof. Right? So you buy a house, it's got a 30-year roof on it. Well, what they don't realize is those plumbing boots, those pipes that stick out of your roof have like a little rubber boot on it. Well, those boots only last like 15 years. So those need to be serviced. They'll probably need to be replaced before
those will fail before the shingles.
Exactly.
It could be a point of intrusion for
so
water.
your roof needs to be serviced, your heating and air, your water heater, all these things need to be serviced. And if you have whether you have a slab or a crawl space, I think like an annual termite inspection or even is it biannual, or what's the one that's every 2 years? Is that biannual, or is that twice a year?
I think it's twice a year. I think biannual is like twice a year.
No, we want the one that's every 2 years.
Every 2 years. So every 2 years.
Every other year. So do like a termite inspection, because you're going to get them, and if you can get them early, there's no damage, no big deal. But man, you let those things go for 5, 6, 10 years, and it's just so much cheaper to get it done. Have that inspection done.
What about filters for HVAC and running the AC in the cold? What's your take?
So it definitely change those filters that are in your return. Well, it kind of depends on what kind of filter you buy, but each filter will tell you, every 30, 90 days.
All the HVAC techs that I work with, they are all against like the really high density, fancy. They're just said, get like the cheapest one, the most basic one, because those really high density ones that catch pollen. They don't let the HVAC system breathe the way it's supposed to, which causes issues. Is that what you find from your experience?
They're just thicker, so that AC is sucking air through that return.
So it's working harder if it's thicker.
And so it's working harder. It's the difference between drinking a glass of water through a straw and a milkshake, right? Your jaw's going to get sore. You're drinking milkshake. Same thing with the heating and air. The less it has to pull, the less it has to work, the longer it's going to last.
That makes sense. Man, you're killing it with the analogies today.
Well, so those cheap filters, I just replace those every 30 days at my house.
Same here.
And I think that's the best thing to do. Just make sure to replace them, because again, if they get real dirty, then make sure unit work a lot harder.
Okay. And what about running your AC in the cold? What's your take
so
on that?
you're not supposed to do that. So the AC, that little box on the outside, that condenser unit, inside of that thing they have a compressor. And so the way that an AC system system works is by taking a liquid refrigerant and changing it into a gas.
Okay.
Right? And if you take when the temperature gets below 65 degrees, that unit isn't able to make that phase change between liquid and gas.
Okay.
So if you run your AC when it's cold, it's going to be shooting a liquid refrigerant into that compressor. And if you remember from chemistry class, you can't compress liquid.
Yeah.
You can only compress gas. So you run the risk of damaging that compressor if you run the AC when it's too cold, and that temperature is about 65 degrees.
Okay, so typically anything below 65, you
Yeah,
don't want to run
don't
the
do
AC.
the AC. It could mess up the unit.
Okay, that's good to know. For some reason, I thought it was 60, but 65 is
Yeah,
probably safer.
yeah, same sort of thing, but
Just if it's
65
cold,
is
yeah.
typical.
Okay, that's good to know. Let's see here. What was the other one that I wanted? What should homeowners look for when hiring a home inspector?
Well, I think that you need to get everybody has their own, just sort of their own preference and personality and people. Like, so you first of all have to find somebody that you trust and that you like and that you feel comfortable with. And, you know, that to me would be really important.
Yeah.
And somebody that you feel like just has your best interest in heart. And then I think also you need to get somebody that has a lot of experience, not just construction experience, but a lot of, I think the good mix would be not just, you don't want to get a home inspector that, you know, couldn't replace a light bulb, but can give you a good inspection. And you don't want to get the contractor that's been a builder for 50 years but has never done a home inspection. So I think the mix of the two is going to be the best. Somebody that has hands-on experience doing a lot of different trades within the construction industry, as well as somebody who has done a lot of inspections. And, you know, when I'm hiring guys, I don't think, you know, it might be a year, it might be 400 inspections before I feel comfortable with them being an inspector. 400, man, you got to go on 400 different inspections before you're a decent, you're a decent inspector.
That's good,
so,
though. It's good to maintain that standard.
Yeah, so I think it's important to find somebody that's done a lot of construction and also done a lot of home inspections. And I think the mix of the two is kind of the most important thing.
No, that definitely sounds like a winning formula.
Yeah.
As far as the inspection industry, what are the latest tools, tech that you're seeing, and any, like, I guess, industry changes that you've been noticing? I'm just curious if there's anything.
Man, it's changing. Like when I started doing this in 2001, we didn't even, like if you wanted pictures, we used just the little Polaroids. Now we have electronic reports and we email them to you. We used to use the carbon paper. So it keeps progressing. Now we have drones flying through there looking at roofs, and I've heard we got little robots that are crawling through crawl spaces for us.
Wow.
And you know,
some crawl spaces that would come in handy.
A lot of people are really getting on board with that, and I think that's great. But I don't think for a lot of this the technology is quite there.
Okay. Right
now, there's not a robot on Earth that is going to be able to crawl a crawl space better than me. But I can't see if there's a leak behind that wall, but if I pull out my infrared camera and I look at at this window, I can tell you if air is getting in or out, if the wind is leaking. You can. So some technologies are really good and really help us out, and then some are just not really quite where they will be in 10 years.
So some tools enhance your guys' abilities, but ultimately having a knowledgeable, experienced person still
at this point for sure. That's the most important thing. But man, some of these tools like the infrared cameras, man, they're really helpful. Yeah,
that's good to know.
Yeah.
Let's see. I guess we can end on a two-part question. What's the most memorable inspection experience that stands out in your career, and what's the most unusual thing that you've discovered during an inspection?
So
or is it all one
most
inspection?
memorable one. So I was in Oregon, right? And I was hanging out with my buddy. They live on the coast, and he's like, "Hey, I got to go get my raft, or I got to go get something." It was like a kayak or something from a neighbor. And so we went over to his neighbor's house, and the neighbor was like an old dude. He was like 65. He was getting ready to go paddle the Grand Canyon or whatever it was, and he was getting ready to leave. And he had, when I was over there, he had like these cool little bonsai trees. And I was like, oh man, these are sweet bonsais, you know, like Mr. Miyagi, he was like trimming the trees. He's like, no, those are my seedlings. I was like, you're what? I don't know what a seedling is. He's like, come over here, let me show you this. And he took me out to the shed at his property, and he opened up the door and unzipped this, you know those things where you put all your clothes, like it's like a big clothes thing, and you unzip, you unzip it, and it's lined. It's just a place to keep all your clothes if you don't have a closet. And he unzipped that, and it was lined in tinfoil, and he had like 7 full-grown pot plants in that thing. And I'm from North Carolina. 7 full-grown pot plants.
Wait, this is pre-legalization.
Well, it was
right?
legal in Oregon for your own, but North Carolina, you're going to jail for the rest of your life. I've never even seen a pot plant, much less 7 of them.
That's
and I was like, that's insane.
That's
totally
funny.
legal in Oregon, but totally illegal here. Well, I was at an inspection in a crawl space, and this crawl space was like 5 feet or 6 feet tall. It was kind of big. Now I was going through, doing my thing, and I kind of went around the corner, and I saw one of those clothes things that I saw at that dude's house.
I know what this is.
And I was like, I know exactly. And I crawled over to it, and I unzipped it, and they had all these bottles in the bottom, and it was lined in tinfoil, and nothing was in there. And I was like, I know what they were doing. I never would have known what it was if I hadn't have seen it at that dude's house. But
did you collect a specimen for research purposes?
No, it was totally empty.
Kidding.
They had like I don't know if it was vinegar bottles or what people do, but they had like bottles at the bottom.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, somebody was growing pot in this crawl space.
Wow.
And it was a vacant house. I don't know who lived there.
Wow, that's some ingenuity right there.
Yeah.
Crawl space.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's crazy.
So, but yeah, that's probably the weirdest thing I've ever found. And then we find all sorts of weird stuff. Like the most memorable one was, I remember I was doing a house on the end of a dead-end road near Uptown, and helicopters were circling over the top, and I was outside wondering what was going on. I heard all the cop cars, and the neighbor was like, man, you need to go back inside. Somebody just got shot on the street over across the road. And are we allowed to talk about this?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
No,
I was like, oh no, this is terrible. I'm here all by myself. Like, I'm little. Somebody's going to try to beat me up.
Oh,
and so I went back inside, but those cops, and there was woods to the side of me, and I was like, man, that'd be the best place to hide. And then I got in the crawl space, and I started thinking, no. The better place to hide than those woods are in this freaking crawl space.
So you start psyching yourself
So I
out.
started crawling back out, like to go get a pocket knife in my car. And as I'm crawling out, this dude's just looking right at me, walking right to me at the crawl space door. And I was like, damn, do I have him come get me in a crawl space? Or like, I didn't know what to do. It was a buyer getting ready to buy it. It was an investor. And I was like, oh, thank goodness.
Good thing you found out before you attacked him, right?
I'll buy me a taco truck. I'm getting out of this business. This is a little too aged for me.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Man. Well, you run into all sorts of things, I'm sure, over the years, and with the amount of turnover, as many houses as you and your company
you
expect.
find all sorts of fun stuff. Man, it's just a great job.
Keeps you on your toes, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Man. Well, hey, TJ, I want to respect your time. We've been here for a good hour or so, and
I
think we've covered a lot of great stuff. So thanks so much for coming and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and we'll, I guess, end it here.
Okay, perfect.
All right, thanks,
Sweet.
man.
Yeah,
Appreciate
definitely,
it.
man.